It was just an ordinary morning, but what was about to happen would change everything in that place. The glass doors opened slowly, and every eye turned toward him. An older man, humble in appearance, walked across the lobby with no rush at all. He wore worn-out clothes, a crumpled straw hat, and shoes still carrying the dust of the road. To most, he looked like nothing more than a farm worker, someone the city barely noticed. But there was something different about him. It wasn't only his humble appearance that caught attention, it was his posture. He walked firmly, calmly, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing, even if no one else believed it. And that precisely was what made him stand out. In that luxurious environment, filled with tailored suits, expensive cologne, and designer handbags, his presence felt completely out of place. Some clients frowned, others whispered. A woman clutched her purse tightly against her chest, as if this man was a threat simply because he didn't dress like the rest. Two young men in suits chuckled, exchanging cruel remarks. "Look at him, lost. Poor guy," one of them sneered. The old man, however, paid no mind. He politely removed his hat as he entered, as if showing respect even to a space that clearly didn't respect him. His eyes, framed by the wrinkles carved by time, still shone with a steady light. There was no arrogance in them, only serenity, and that seemed to unsettle people even more. With every step he took, the contrast grew louder. On one side, people desperately trying to display greatness through clothes and posture. On the other, this simple man whose very silence seemed to declare, "I don't need to prove anything to anyone." And because he didn't need to prove himself, he sparked a strange mix of curiosity and contempt. Whispers grew louder as he walked across the polished marble floor. The bright lights reflected perfectly off shiny shoes and glossy bags, but also off the dusty boots of that old man. For some, it was laughable. For others, irritating. The space once buzzing with conversations about business and travel now felt heavy, as if everyone just wanted him gone. But he wasn't going anywhere. In fact, his destination was right there. He walked up to the counter and placed his calloused hands on the glass, hands that told stories of years under the sun, of hard battles no one in that room could even imagine. And then silence, almost absolute silence. The same question burned in every mind. What is a man like him doing here? What no one knew was that this was only the first chapter of a turnaround they would never forget. The contrast in that room was impossible to ignore. Everywhere you looked, there were men in crisp suits, women in high heels and designer dresses, and the faint smell of expensive cologne floating in the air. The place screamed wealth, status, and exclusivity. People weren't just there to do business. They were there to show they belonged, to remind everyone else how important they thought they were. And right in the middle of all that glitter and polish stood the old man. His shirt was faded from years of use, his straw hat rested awkwardly in his hands, and his boots left faint traces of dust across the marble floor. To some, it felt like a crime against that spotless environment. To him, it was just another day. You could see it in the way people reacted. A group of businessmen in the corner paused their conversation, glancing at him with smirks that carried both pity and disdain. A woman whispered something behind her diamond-covered hand, and her friend stifled a laugh. Even the receptionist, perfectly styled and trained to smile at every client, struggled to hide the discomfort on her face. The manager, sitting in his glass-walled office, leaned back in his chair as he watched the scene unfold. He saw the old man approaching the counter and already decided, another nobody. out of place. What is he even doing here? To the manager, people were measured by brands, by posture, by how loudly they could flaunt their wealth. And this man, by all appearances, had none of it. Yet if you looked closely, there was something the others missed. The old man didn't seem nervous, even with all the stares and whispers around him. He wasn't rushing, wasn't fumbling. His steps were steady, his eyes calm. He looked like someone who had walked through storms far greater than judgmental eyes and shallow arrogance. That quiet confidence clashed with the superficial anxiety of the others. While they tugged at their ties, checked their watches, and scrolled nervously through their phones, he simply stood there, still, composed, as if time itself belonged to him. And that's what made the scene so powerful. On the surface, he was invisible, unimportant, a man out of place. But deep down, something about him carried weight. He didn't need a suit to command respect. He didn't need shiny shoes or a luxury watch to look important.
Alone demanded attention. What no one in that room realized was that the balance of power was about to shift completely. They thought they were looking at a man who didn't belong. Soon they would discover that they were the ones who had been blind all along. The old man finally reached the counter. He set his straw hat down gently, as if showing respect even in the smallest gesture. His hands, rough and worn from years of hard work, rested calmly on the glass surface. He cleared his throat politely and spoke with a steady voice. "Good morning. I'd like to make a transaction from my account." It was a simple request, but to the receptionist it sounded almost absurd. She blinked at him, then forced a smile that was more condescending than kind. Before she could respond, the manager, who had been watching closely from his office, decided to step in. He straightened his expensive Italian suit, adjusted his silk tie, and walked over with the confidence of a man who believed the whole room revolved around him. When he reached the counter, he didn't greet the old man with respect. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, tilting his head as if he were talking to a lost child. "Can I help you?" His tone dripped with irony. The old man nodded. "Yes, I need to transfer some money from my account today." The manager raised an eyebrow. He glanced at the receptionist, who tried to hide a smirk. "Of course," he said, pausing for effect. "And how much money are we talking about?" 15 million, the old man replied calmly, as if he had just asked for a glass of water. The silence was immediate. The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, heads turned, and eyes widened. 15 million from this man! The receptionist actually coughed, nearly choking on her own surprise. A few clients couldn't help but laugh, covering their mouths with their hands. The manager, however, burst into open laughter. 15 million! He repeated the number as if it were the punchline of a joke. He looked at his staff, then back at the old man. "Sir, are you sure you didn't mean $15? Or maybe 150? The laughter echoed across the polished lobby. Even people who had nothing to do with the situation began to giggle, feeding on the arrogance in the air. To them, it was a spectacle, someone so out of place daring to speak of millions. But through it all, the old man remained still. His face didn't flinch, his eyes didn't lower. He had seen this before. Judgment, doubt, ridicule. He had lived a lifetime where appearances always fooled the arrogant. So instead of getting angry, he simply said in a calm, steady voice, "No, I meant 15 million. You may check the account yourself." His words sliced through the laughter like a blade, though few realized it yet. To them, this was entertainment. To him, it was just the beginning. The manager's laughter lingered in the air like a bad perfume. He straightened up, still shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. The old man, however, didn't move. He stood calm and collected, the way someone does when they know the truth is on their side. 15 million, the manager repeated loudly, almost shouting so everyone could hear. You hear that, Carla? Our friend here wants to move 15 million. The receptionist chuckled nervously. A few clients outright laughed. To them, it was a circus show, and the old man was the clown. But he didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he looked directly at the manager with those calm, steady eyes and said, "Yes, 15 million, and it must be completed before 2 o'clock today." The room went silent again. Not because they believed him, but because of the way he said it. There was no hesitation, no stutter, no sign of doubt. His tone wasn't defensive, it was matter of fact, like someone used to giving clear instructions. The manager leaned in closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sir, maybe you're confused. This isn't the Farmers Credit Union down the road. This is the central branch. Transactions of that size require, let's just say, a different kind of client." He said the last words slowly, as though savoring the humiliation. The old man simply nodded. "That's why I came here, because this is the right place, and this is the right time." For a moment, the manager's smirk faltered. Something in the man's tone unsettled him, though he quickly covered it up with another laugh. "All right, then," he snapped his fingers at Carla. "Let's entertain him. Pull up his account, let's see how many millions our friend has tucked away." Carla hesitated. Her hands hovered above the keyboard as if touching the system would burn her. Everyone leaned forward. Clients, staff, even a security guard who had stepped closer, just in case. The old man stood tall, watching, waiting. His breathing was steady, his expression calm. And then, in a voice that carried across the room, he added one thing.
More line that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. "If the account doesn't have what I said, then you can laugh all you want. But if it does, maybe it's time you start asking yourselves who I really am." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. For the first time, some of the laughter died down. Whispers spread again, but now mixed with curiosity. Could it be true? Could this man, who looked like he didn't belong, really have that kind of money? The manager scoffed, trying to hide his sudden discomfort. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's find out." And just like that, the unexpected request had turned into a test, one that would change everything. Carla's fingers finally touched the keyboard, though her hesitation was clear. She typed in the client's name slowly, Geraldo Almeida. The letters glowed on the screen as the system searched. The manager leaned on the counter, grinning, waiting for what he was sure would be the punchline. "Well, let's see," he said loudly, making sure everyone in the lobby was listening. 15 million, was it? Maybe it was 15 reais. Or 15 cents. His laughter rang out, and a few others chuckled nervously, trying to stay on his side. The old man didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just waited, calm, steady, almost as if he knew this entire act would eventually collapse under its own weight. Carla's fingers darted across the screen. For a brief second, her face changed. Something she saw made her freeze. But the manager didn't notice. Too busy with his own performance, he snapped his fingers again. "Print me the balance," he ordered. "We'll have a good laugh together." Maybe we can all chip in and give him the 15 reais he probably meant." A ripple of laughter spread across the lobby. Some clients turned their backs, smirking, whispering insults they thought no one would hear. One woman muttered, "People like him shouldn't even be here." Another man shook his head with a smile, saying, "Ridiculous." The manager, fueled by the crowd's reaction, puffed out his chest. This was his moment to shine, to prove once again that he was the gatekeeper of status. He leaned close to Geraldo and said in a low voice meant to sting, "You don't belong here, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." But Geraldo simply met his eyes, unshaken. "Young man, I've belonged in places much harder than this. If you think this room decides who I am, you're wrong." The words carried a strange weight. They didn't sound like the protests of a man desperate to prove himself. They sounded like truth, spoken by someone who had endured far worse than mockery. For the first time, the manager hesitated. Only for a second, but it was enough to break the rhythm of his arrogance. Still, unwilling to lose face, he straightened up and forced another laugh. "Let's get security ready," he announced. "If our friend here starts causing trouble, we'll have him escorted out. We don't want real clients feeling uncomfortable." The security guard stepped forward, crossing his arms. A few people clapped quietly, as if the show was about to end. But they had no idea the real show hadn't even started yet. Geraldo adjusted his old straw hat under his arm, his calm presence standing in contrast to the arrogance surrounding him. He didn't need to raise his voice or argue. The truth was already moving toward the surface, and soon no one would be laughing. The security guard loomed closer, his broad frame casting a shadow across the old man. The murmurs in the lobby grew louder, half excitement, half disgust. Everyone seemed convinced that this would end with the outsider being escorted out, humiliated once and for all. But Geraldo didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply placed his hat gently back on his head and stood tall, his posture steady, his breathing calm. It was almost unsettling. Most people in his position would have raised their voice, argued, or pleaded. He did none of that. Instead, he looked directly at the manager and said in a tone so calm it silenced part of the room, "You seem very sure of yourself, but why don't you check my account before you decide who belongs here and who doesn't?" The manager scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Procedures, sir. Transfers like this require proof of funds, documentation, approvals. It's not as simple as walking in here with dirty boots and big numbers." His words dripped with disdain, but his laughter no longer carried the same strength. Something about the old man's composure was beginning to gnaw at him. Geraldo didn't back down. "Young man," he said slowly, but firmly, "obstacles are easy to create when you don't want people like me here. But obstacles don't change the truth." The words cut through the lobby like a blade. People who had been laughing moments earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some frowned, realizing the situation was taking a different turn. Carla, still staring at the computer screen, hesitated.
Knew what she saw. Large transactions, balances far beyond what she ever expected. But fear of the manager's reaction kept her quiet. The tension in her hands was visible as they hovered nervously over the keyboard. The manager noticed her hesitation. "Well," he barked, "what's the balance? Tell us so we can all move on." Carla swallowed hard. She opened her mouth to speak, but Geraldo lifted his hand gently, stopping her. His calm gaze never left the manager's face. "There's no need to rush her,"
he said softly. "The truth doesn't fear waiting, and neither do I." That simple sentence shifted the atmosphere again. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. With a quiet strength that came from someone who had faced storms, poverty, and years of being underestimated. The security guard, once ready to remove him, now stood frozen, unsure. Some clients who had mocked him earlier now exchanged uncertain glances. The arrogance in the room was losing ground, little by little, against something far stronger, dignity. The manager tried to laugh again, but this time it sounded forced. "All right, old man," he said, though his voice cracked slightly. "Let's see how long your calmness lasts, because today I'm in charge here." But deep down, everyone watching had the same thought. It didn't feel like the manager was in charge anymore. The room felt heavier now. The laughter that once echoed proudly had thinned into nervous whispers. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter, as though the building itself sensed something was about to change. Carla's hands trembled on the keyboard. She had already seen the numbers glowing on the screen, numbers that didn't belong to a poor old farmer. For a moment, she debated saying nothing, but the truth pressed against her chest until she could hardly breathe. Finally, she whispered, almost too softly to be heard, "Mr. Leonardo, the account? It's—" The manager cut her off immediately, raising his voice. "Enough! Don't waste everyone's time. Just confirm what we all know." But Geraldo tilted his head slightly, his calm eyes never leaving the manager's face. "Let her speak," he said gently. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried more authority than the manager's shouting. Carla glanced at Geraldo, then back at her boss. Her throat was dry, but she forced the words out. "Sir, this account has consistent transfers in the millions every week, balance far above what he said." The silence that followed was deafening. The smirks on the clients' faces melted instantly. The security guard's arms slowly dropped to his sides. Even the woman who had clutched her purse earlier now lowered it, her face pale. The manager blinked, his jaw tightening. He let out a short laugh, desperate and brittle. "Impossible. He's not the owner. Someone else must have added him as a proxy." But before he could spin more excuses, Geraldo reached calmly into the pocket of his worn-out shirt. From it, he pulled a small, scratched tablet. With careful hands, he unlocked the screen and tapped through a series of documents. The screen glowed with digital certificates, stamped contracts, and signatures of executives. He turned it toward the manager. "My name," he said softly, "is Geraldo Almeida, and I am not only the account holder. You're looking at the primary shareholder of this institution." Gasps erupted around the room. Carla covered her mouth with both hands. One of the businessmen in the corner muttered, "Shareholder?" as if the word itself had knocked the air from his lungs. The manager's face drained of color. His arrogance faltered, replaced with panic. He stared at the documents on the screen, his lips parting, but no words coming out. The truth was right there, undeniable. Geraldo adjusted his straw hat, his calm voice, almost fatherly. "You judged me by my boots, by my shirt, by the dust on my shoulders. But money doesn't change the worth of a man. Respect does, and you've shown neither." The revelation had begun. The balance of power had shifted, and for the first time, the manager realized he wasn't the one in control. His smirk had vanished, replaced by wide, panicked eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man drowning on dry land, gasping silently, realizing the water was rising too fast. You can't be serious," he stammered finally, though even he didn't believe the words. His voice cracked, exposing the fear behind the facade. Geraldo's calm voice cut through the chaos. "I am serious. And I am tired of watching people like you humiliate the very clients who keep this bank alive. Do you think wealth is proven by a suit, by a car, by the shine of your shoes? Respect is not earned that way. Respect is shown when you treat everyone, rich or poor, with the same dignity." The lobby felt like a courtroom now. Every person who had laughed, whispered, or mocked him minutes earlier sat in silent judgment of themselves. They shifted in their seats, embarrassed, wishing they could disappear. Patricia, the socialite who had sneered at him earlier, looked as though her jewelry had turned to plastic. She lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning. Dr. Medeiros, the self-important man who had spoken about class and order, looked like a child caught misbehaving. The shock wave of truth spread through every corner of the room. For the first time, the clients weren't looking down at Geraldo. They were looking up, in awe, fear, and regret. And then Geraldo leaned slightly on the counter, his voice steady, his words like stone. "Now tell me, Mr. Manager, who doesn't belong here?" The question hit harder than a slap. No one dared to answer, because deep down, everyone already knew. The lobby had turned into a stage, and every single person inside was now an unwilling actor in a story they would never forget. The man they thought was a nobody stood at the center with more authority than anyone else in the room. The manager, once so loud and arrogant, now looked like a child caught stealing cookies, shaking, pale, and unable to meet Geraldo's eyes. Geraldo adjusted his straw hat slowly, like a man who had all the time in the world. Then he spoke, not shouting, not angry, just calm and steady, which somehow made his words cut even deeper. "You laughed at me because of my clothes. You mocked me because of my boots. You thought the dust on my shoulders defined who I am. But let me tell you something." He paused, scanning the room. Every head was bowed, every gaze lowered. The true measure of a man is not in what he wears, but in how he treats others. The receptionist, Carla, began to cry silently, remembering her own cruel chuckle minutes earlier. The security guard shifted nervously, his shame written all over his face. Clients who once smirked now sat frozen, unable to undo what they had said or thought. Geraldo's eyes landed back on the manager. "And you," he said firmly, though not unkindly, "you believed power was about belittling others. You believed respect was something you could demand with arrogance. But leadership is not about stepping on people. Leadership is about lifting them up." The words hung heavy in the air. Some people nodded slowly, as if realizing the truth for the first time in their lives. Then Geraldo took a deep breath and delivered the final blow. "I built this bank with one dream, that every person, rich or poor, would walk through these doors and be treated with dignity. What I saw today is the opposite of that dream, and that is something I will not allow." Gasps spread again. Everyone knew what was coming next. Geraldo was not only exposing the arrogance in the room, he was about to decide the fate of the very people who had mocked him. "You, Mr. Manager," he said firmly, though not unkindly, "you no longer represent this institution. Your service ends today." The manager's knees buckled. He collapsed into a chair, speechless. His kingdom of arrogance had crumbled in a single morning. But Geraldo wasn't finished.
He turned to Carla, the receptionist who had laughed along. Respect is not something you give only to those you think can reward you. Respect is owed to every soul who walks in here. Learn that lesson, or life will teach it to you the hard way. And finally, Geraldo's gaze softened as he turned to Ana Paula, the only employee who had dared to defend him. You stood up for what was right when you didn't know who I was. That is courage. That is integrity. And that is the kind of leadership this place needs. From today, you will be promoted. This bank needs more people like you. The entire room erupted in whispers. Some people wept from shame, others from relief. But one truth was clear. This was more than a lecture. It was a lesson of life, etched forever into the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. The manager sat frozen in his chair, his hands trembling, his once proud eyes now empty. Around him, the lobby was filled with silence, not the silence of arrogance anymore, but the silence of realization. Everyone understood that a line had been drawn that morning.
He didn't raise his voice or celebrate his victory. He simply adjusted his old straw hat again, like a man finishing a long day's work, and continued speaking with the same calmness that had carried him through the entire storm. "This place will change," he said firmly, "because wealth is not built on marble floors or shiny shoes. True wealth is built on respect, on honesty, on dignity." His gaze swept the room, pausing on each person, as if carving those words into their hearts. Some lowered their heads in shame, while others nodded, moved by the truth they could no longer deny. He turned once more to Ana Paula. "Tomorrow you will call a meeting with every employee in this branch. From now on, our policy is simple. Every client is treated like a human being. No exceptions, no masks, no arrogance." Ana Paula's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were not from fear. They were from pride. She had stood up for a man when everyone else tried to tear him down, and now she was being entrusted with the future of the institution itself. The receptionist Carlo whispered through sobs, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Almeida." Geraldo looked at her kindly and answered, "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to yourself. And promise me this, next time don't wait to know who a person is before deciding if they deserve respect." The lesson was clear. Respect wasn't for sale. It wasn't reserved for those who looked the part. It was owed to everyone. With that, Geraldo placed his calloused hands back on his hat, gave a small nod, and walked slowly toward the glass doors. The marble floor echoed with each step of his dusty boots, but this time no one smirked, no one whispered. Instead, people watched in awe, some even standing, as if in silent tribute. As the doors closed behind him, the weight of what had happened remained inside. The manager's downfall, Ana Paula's rise, the tears of shame from employees and clients, all of it became the foundation for something new. Weeks later, the branch was unrecognizable. A plaque at the entrance read, "Here every person is welcome. Here respect is not optional." Employees treated farmers, workers, and retirees with the same care they gave to businessmen in suits. The culture of arrogance was gone, replaced by something stronger, dignity. And as for Geraldo, he returned to his farm. His animals, his simple clothes, his quiet life. He never needed recognition, because true greatness doesn't need to be announced. It reveals itself when the moment calls for it. That day, a simple man in dusty boots had reminded an entire world of something many had forgotten. The value of a person is never measured by appearances, but by character. And that was the lesson they would carry forever.